What if your addiction is not ruining your life, but secretly building it? Not the life you want, the life you keep waking up to. Carl Jung believed that reality is not shaped first by actions, but by what lives unnoticed in the unconscious. And addiction is not just a behavior, it is a code, an ancient psychological pattern that quietly programs how you think, what you feel, what you attract, and even what feels possible to you. This is why the same situations repeat, why the same frustrations return, why the world seems to respond to you in predictable ways, no matter how much you try to change on the surface. Most people think addiction is something they do. Jung saw something far more disturbing. Addiction is something that creates. It shapes perception, it rewrites meaning, it builds a reality that feels real, solid, and unavoidable. This video reveals the ancient mechanism behind that process, not to blame you, but to expose the hidden code that has been running your life quietly, faithfully, and without mercy. There is a part of you that you refuse to see, not because it is not there, but because seeing it would change everything. Jung called this the shadow. It is made of all the pieces you rejected about yourself. The anger you were told was bad, the need you learned to hide, the fear you pretended did not exist. These rejected parts do not disappear. They gather in the dark, and they grow hungry. Addiction is how the shadow eats. It finds a substance, a behavior, a pattern that gives temporary relief from the tension of being split in two. On the surface, you are trying to be good, acceptable, in control. Underneath, the shadow is demanding recognition. It wants what you denied it. It wants to be real again, so it pulls you toward the very thing you swore you would stop doing. Not because you are weak, but because something inside you is starving for acknowledgement. Every time you feed the addiction, you are not just satisfying a craving, you are feeding the shadow. You are giving energy to the part of yourself that lives outside your conscious awareness. And here is what most people miss. The shadow does not just want the drink, the drug, the scroll, the distraction. It wants your attention. It wants you to finally look at what you have been avoiding. But instead of looking, you feed it again and again, and the shadow grows larger. It begins to shape how you see the world. When the shadow is in control, reality starts to bend around it. You notice only the things that confirm your hidden beliefs. If the shadow carries shame, you will see judgment everywhere. If it holds rage, you will find reasons to be angry in every interaction. If it is built from fear, the world will appear threatening no matter how safe your circumstances actually are. This is not paranoia. This is perception being filtered through the part of you that you refuse to own. Jung understood that the shadow does not go away when ignored. It becomes the lens through which you experience everything. It selects your thoughts. It interprets your emotions. It decides what feels true. And because it operates below conscious awareness, you never question it. You think you are seeing reality, but you are seeing the shadow's version of reality, a version designed to keep you feeding it. The addiction is just the delivery system. It is how the shadow maintains control. Every time you return to the behavior, you strengthen the neural pathways that make the shadow's perspective feel more real than your own. You train your brain to prioritize the shadow's needs over your conscious intentions. And slowly, without realizing it, you stop trying to change. Not because you lack willpower, but because the shadow has convinced you that this is just who you are. This is just how life is. This is just what you deserve. But the shadow is not evil. It is not trying to destroy you. It is trying to survive. It is the part of you that got locked away because it was too much, too painful, too unacceptable. And now it is using the only language it knows to get your attention. It is creating suffering, because suffering is the one thing you cannot ignore forever. The addiction is a message written in the language of pain. And until you learn to read it, the shadow will keep writing. Most people spend their entire lives fighting the addiction without ever meeting the shadow. They try to stop the behavior while leaving the cause untouched. They promise themselves tomorrow will be different. But tomorrow is built by the same unconscious forces that built today. The shadow does not respond to promises. It responds to recognition. It needs you to turn around and finally see what you have been running from. Only then does the feeding stop. Only then does the addiction lose its power. Because the shadow no longer needs to scream. It has finally been heard. The relationship between you and your shadow is ancient. It began the first time you learned that parts of you were not acceptable. Maybe you were 3 years old and you got angry and someone told you to stop. Maybe you were 5 and you cried and someone said you were being dramatic. Maybe you were 7 and you wanted something desperately and someone made you feel ashamed for wanting. In those moments, you made a decision. You decided that certain parts of you had to go away if you wanted to be loved, to be safe, to belong. So you buried them. You pushed them down into the basement of your psyche, and you forgot they were there. But they did not forget about you. They waited. They watched. They felt every moment you denied them, and they began to organize themselves into a separate system, a system with its own needs, its own voice, its own agenda. Jung saw this happen in every single person he worked with. The shadow is not optional. It is not something only damaged people have. It is the inevitable result of being socialized, of learning to fit into a world that demands you be less than whole. The shadow knows you better than you know yourself. It knows what you are afraid of. It knows what you want but will not admit. It knows the truth you keep hidden, even from your own thoughts, and it uses that knowledge to stay fed. Every time you feel a certain way, the shadow recognizes the signal. It knows that feeling leads to the behavior. It knows the behavior brings temporary relief, so it ensures the feeling keeps appearing. It keeps the cycle alive. Not out of malice, but out of survival instinct. The shadow believes that without the addiction, it will disappear. And it is right. The moment you stop feeding it, you have to face it. And facing it means integrating it, accepting it, giving it a place in your conscious life. The shadow resists this with everything it has because integration feels like death. What you call your addiction is actually your shadow's lifeline. The behavior is not random. It is precisely calibrated to keep you from looking inward, to keep you distracted, to keep you in a state where confronting the buried material feels impossible. Every drink, every pill, every hour lost to scrolling, every binge is the shadow saying, not yet, not today. Do not look, do not feel, do not remember. Stay here with me in the safe darkness where nothing has to change, and you obey, not because you want to, but because the alternative terrifies you more than the suffering you already know. This is why the shadow must be met with compassion, not condemnation. It is not your enemy. It is the part of you that learned to survive in the only way it could. It protected you when you were small and powerless. It took on the feelings you could not process. It carried the pain you could not bear. And now, decades later, it is still trying to protect you using the same old methods. It does not know those methods no longer work. It does not know you are no longer that small, powerless child. It is frozen in time, repeating the same pattern, waiting for you to finally turn around and acknowledge what it has been holding all these years. Your brain is not designed to make you happy. It is designed to keep you alive. And to your brain, alive means familiar. This is the mechanism that traps you, not lack of knowledge, not lack of desire, but the deep, ancient wiring that treats anything unfamiliar as a potential threat, even if the unfamiliar thing is good for you, even if the familiar thing is killing you. Jung recognized this pattern in every patient he treated. They knew what they needed to do. They understood the consequences of not doing it. but when the moment came to choose, they chose the known over the unknown. Every single time. Not because they were stupid or self-destructive, but because the brain has a hierarchy of priorities, and safety through familiarity sits at the very top. When you were young, your brain learned what normal feels like. Not normal as in healthy, normal as in predictable. If you grew up in chaos, chaos feels normal. If you grew up with neglect, absence feels normal. If you grew up walking on eggshells, anxiety feels normal. Your nervous system adapted to those conditions. It learned to function within them. And now, decades later, those conditions feel like home, uncomfortable home, painful home, but home nonetheless. This is why you keep returning to the same patterns. Your brain is not sabotaging you. It is trying to return you to the familiar baseline. When you try to change, when you try to do something different, your nervous system interprets it as danger. Not because the new behavior is actually dangerous, but because it does not match the template your brain built in childhood. The template that says, this is what life feels like. This is what relationships feel like. This is what you feel like. The addiction fits perfectly into this template. It does not matter if the addiction is destroying your health, your relationships, your future. What matters to the brain is that it feels known. It has a script, a predictable sequence of events. You feel bad. You engage the behavior. You feel temporary relief. You feel worse. You repeat. The brain loves this loop, not because it is pleasant, but because it is reliable. And reliability equals safety in the primitive regions of your mind. Jung saw this as the ego trying to maintain its current structure. The ego is not your true self. It is the organized set of beliefs and patterns you identify with. And the ego resists change with extraordinary force, because change means death. Not literal death, but the death of the current identity. If you stop being the person who does this thing, who are you? If you break the pattern, what becomes of the self you have known for so long? The ego cannot answer these questions, so it panics. And panic feels like craving. Every time you move towards something better, something healthier, something more aligned with who you want to be, the ego sounds the alarm. It floods your system with discomfort. It generates thoughts that justify going back. It creates emotional states that make the old behavior seem like the only logical choice. This is not weakness. This is your brain doing exactly what it was designed to do: protect the familiar self at all costs. But here is the trap. The familiar self is the one built by your wounds. It is the self that learned to cope with pain by creating more pain. It is the self that discovered the addiction as a solution to a problem that no longer exists. You are not that child anymore. The danger has passed, but the brain is still running the old program, still choosing familiar suffering over unfamiliar peace. Because peace does not match the template, peace feels foreign, and foreign feels dangerous. This is why willpower fails. You are not fighting the addiction. You are fighting millions of years of evolutionary programming that says the known is safer than the unknown. You are fighting a nervous system that learned your emotional baseline in an environment that no longer exists. You are fighting an ego that believes change equals annihilation. No amount of wanting it to be different will overpower that. You cannot think your way out of a pattern that was built before you could think. The brain treats your emotional baseline like a thermostat. When things get too different from that baseline, the brain activates mechanisms to bring you back. If your baseline is anxiety and you start feeling calm, the brain will generate anxious thoughts to return you to familiar territory. If your baseline is loneliness and you start connecting with others, the brain will create reasons to push them away. If your baseline is chaos and life becomes stable, the brain will manufacture crisis, not consciously, not deliberately, but automatically, through systems that predate language and reason. This is happening right now in your life. You move toward health, toward change, toward growth, and then something inside you hits the brakes. You forget, you get distracted, you suddenly feel the pull of the old behavior stronger than ever. You think you are failing, you think you are broken, but you are not failing. Your brain is succeeding at its primary job, keeping you inside the familiar zone, even if that zone is suffering, even if that zone is destroying you. Familiar destruction feels safer than unfamiliar creation. Jung discovered that many of his patients had what he called a secret loyalty to their suffering. They said they wanted to change. They believed they wanted to change. But beneath the conscious desire was an unconscious commitment to staying the same. Because staying the same meant staying loyal to the family system they came from, staying loyal to the version of themselves their parents knew, staying loyal to the identity that was formed in survival mode. Changing felt like betrayal, like abandoning the people who shaped them, like saying that everything they learned was wrong. So the brain creates a double bind. You cannot stay the same because it hurts too much, but you cannot change because it feels too dangerous. You are trapped between two impossibilities, and the addiction becomes the compromise. It lets you survive the familiar pain while avoiding the unfamiliar risk. It keeps you in motion without actually moving. It gives your system something to do while ensuring nothing fundamentally changes. The brain accepts this compromise because it maintains the baseline, and maintaining the baseline is always the brain's first priority. Understanding this does not immediately fix it, but it changes how you relate to the pattern. You stop blaming yourself for choosing the familiar. You stop thinking you are uniquely broken. You start to see that your brain is functioning exactly as designed. It is protecting you from perceived danger. The fact that the danger is not real anymore does not matter. The brain does not know that. It only knows the template it learned. And until that template is updated, until new experiences create new neural pathways, until the nervous system learns that change is safe, the brain will keep pulling you back to what it knows. This is not failure. This is biology. And biology can be rewired, but only if you first understand why it is wired the way it is. Only if you stop fighting yourself and start working with the system you have. Only if you accept that your brain is not your enemy. It is trying to keep you alive using information that is decades out of date. And once you see that, once you really see it, you can begin the slow work of teaching it something new. By the way, if you're curious to go even deeper and integrate your shadows and light, check out the SIM Method ebook. It's a concise guide that can help you unlock your inner power in just 5 minutes a day. The link is in the first pinned comment below. You wake up planning to be different. By noon, you are living the same day again. This is not coincidence. There is a script running beneath your awareness. Jung called it the complex, a cluster of emotional memories, beliefs, and automatic responses that activate without your permission. The complex is not random. It is highly organized, and it writes your future by repeating your past. The script was written long ago, in moments when you felt powerless, rejected, unseen, or overwhelmed. Your young mind made decisions about how the world works and who you are within it. These decisions became rules, rules that now govern your behavior without you ever noticing. The addiction is simply the script playing out in real time. It is not a flaw in your character, it is a pattern following its programming. Think about your last relapse, not the one you planned, but the one that seemed to happen on its own. What were you feeling right before? What thought crossed your mind? What situation were you in? If you trace it back carefully, you will find a familiar emotional signature, a feeling state that your system recognizes. And the moment that state appears, the script activates. It does not ask for permission, it simply runs. The script contains instructions for every scenario. How to respond when criticized, what to do when afraid, how to numb when overwhelmed, where to hide when exposed. These instructions were useful once. They helped you survive situations you were too small to handle any other way. But the script does not update. It does not learn that you are no longer small. It does not recognize that the original threat is gone. It just keeps running the same instructions, year after year, creating the same outcomes. Jung spent decades helping people identify their scripts. He noticed that the same patterns appeared across generations. A father's wound became a son's wound, not through genetics, but through learned emotional responses. The script passed from one nervous system to another. The child watched the parent cope. The child absorbed the pattern, and 30 years later, the child, now an adult, is running the same script without ever consciously choosing it. The addiction is written into the script as a solution, a way to manage feelings that were once too big to feel. But the script does not distinguish between past and present. It does not care that you are now capable of handling those feelings differently. When the emotional trigger appears, the script activates the addiction sequence automatically. You think you are making a choice, but the choice was made decades ago by a version of you that no longer exists. This is why logic does not work. You can understand every reason why you should stop. You can list all the consequences. You can promise yourself with complete sincerity. But when the script activates, none of that matters. The emotional memory is stronger than rational thought. The body remembers what the mind wants to forget, and the body follows the script. Most people try to change their behavior without touching the script. They focus on the action, not the instruction. They try to stop drinking, stop using, stop scrolling, stop eating. But the script is still there, still running, still generating the same emotional states that require the same solutions. So the behavior returns, not because you failed, but because you never addressed the code beneath the code. The script also determines what you notice in the world. If the script says you are not enough, you will see evidence of that everywhere. If the script says people will leave, you will unconsciously push them away to confirm the belief. If the script says you are broken, you will interpret every setback as proof. This is not pessimism. This is selective attention guided by unconscious instructions. You are not seeing reality. You are seeing the reality the script expects. Jung believed the only way to change the script is to bring it into consciousness, to read it out loud, to see the exact instructions you have been following. Only then can you question them. Only then can you ask if they are still true. Only then can you choose to write something new. But most people never read the script. They just keep living it, day after day, year after year, wondering why nothing ever changes. The answer is simple. You cannot rewrite what you refuse to read. The script lives in your body as much as in your mind. It is stored in muscle tension, in breathing patterns, in the way you hold yourself when certain feelings arise. When the script activates, your body assumes a familiar posture. Your shoulders tighten, your jaw clenches, your breath becomes shallow. These physical responses are part of the programming. They signal to your nervous system that the old response is needed. And before you consciously realize what is happening, you are already in motion toward the addiction. This is why talking about the addiction rarely changes it. The script is not just cognitive, it is somatic. It is written into your flesh. Therapy that only addresses thoughts misses half the program. You can understand why you do what you do. You can trace the pattern back to its origin. You can see the script clearly. But if the body is still running the old programming, the behavior will continue. Because the body does not care what you understand. It cares what it has learned to do when certain signals appear. Jung worked with patients who could explain their patterns perfectly. They had insight. They had awareness. They could tell you exactly why they kept repeating the same destructive behavior, but they could not stop. Because insight without embodied change is just intellectual understanding. The script remains active in the nervous system. The triggers still fire. The sequence still runs. And the person, despite knowing better, follows the instructions their body received decades ago. The script also creates its own reinforcement system. Every time you follow it, you strengthen it. Every time the addiction provides relief, even temporary relief, the script marks that as success. It does not matter that the relief is followed by worse pain. The script only registers that the sequence worked. Problem arose, solution deployed, tension reduced, success, file away for future use. And the next time that problem arises, the script runs faster, smoother, more automatically. This is why the pattern becomes more entrenched over time. In the beginning, there might have been a choice, a moment of decision. But after hundreds or thousands of repetitions, the script runs before choice is possible. The feeling appears, the script activates, the body moves, and by the time your conscious mind catches up, you are already doing the thing you promised yourself you would not do. You did not decide to do it. The script decided, and you followed. Breaking this cycle requires more than wanting to change. It requires intercepting the script at the moment it activates, feeling the familiar feeling without immediately following the familiar action, sitting with the emotional trigger without engaging the programmed response. This is extraordinarily difficult because every cell in your body is screaming for relief. The script has convinced your nervous system that the addiction is the only way to handle this feeling, and your nervous system will fight you when you try to prove it wrong. But every time you interrupt the script, you weaken it. Every time you feel the trigger and choose differently, you create a new possibility. The script does not disappear overnight, but it becomes less automatic. The gap between trigger and response grows wider, and in that gap, something new can emerge. Not a new script necessarily, but the capacity to respond freshly, to meet the moment as it is, not as the script says it should be. This is what freedom looks like. Not the absence of triggers, not the absence of difficult feelings, but the presence of choice, where once there was only programming. And that choice, repeated over and over, eventually rewrites the instructions that have been running your life without your permission. You do not have an addiction problem, you have a perception problem. The addiction is not separate from how you see the world. It is how you see the world. It becomes the filter through which all experience passes. And once that filter is in place, reality itself begins to confirm the pattern. Jung understood that perception is not neutral. You do not simply observe the world, you create it through the act of perceiving. The mind does not receive reality, it constructs it, and the materials it uses are your beliefs, your memories, your expectations, your wounds. When addiction is woven into those materials, it shapes every construction, every thought, every interpretation, every meaning you assign to what happens around you. When the addiction becomes your lens, ordinary events take on distorted significance. A friend cancels plans, and instead of thinking they are busy, you think they are rejecting you. A project fails, and instead of seeing it as a normal setback, you see it as proof you are worthless. Someone offers help, and instead of accepting it, you see it as pity or manipulation. The lens does not let neutral information through. It bends everything toward a single conclusion. You are alone, you are broken, you are too much or not enough, and the only relief is the behavior. This is not dramatic thinking. This is the lens functioning exactly as designed. The addiction rewires how you process information. It primes your brain to look for specific patterns, to expect specific outcomes. And because attention shapes reality, you begin to find exactly what you are looking for. Not because the world has changed, but because your filter has. The lens also affects how you feel in your own body. When addiction is the dominant pattern, your baseline emotional state shifts. You stop feeling neutral. You stop feeling calm. You exist in a constant low level of discomfort, a background hum of wrongness. And because you cannot identify the source, you attribute it to external things. Your job, your partner, your body, your life. The lens makes you believe the problem is out there. That if you could just fix the external circumstances, the internal discomfort would stop. But the discomfort is not being caused by your circumstances. It is being caused by the lens itself. Jung noticed that people living through the lens of addiction often described life as inherently difficult, inherently painful, inherently disappointing. They were not being negative. They were accurately describing their experience. Because through the lens, life actually is those things. The lens blocks access to beauty, to peace, to connection. It does not let those experiences register as real. Even when they happen, the lens reinterprets them. A moment of joy becomes fleeting. A moment of connection becomes suspicious. A moment of peace becomes uncomfortable. The lens cannot allow sustained positive experience because it contradicts the core pattern, and the brain always protects the pattern. The danger is that you start to believe the lens is you. You think this is just your personality. This is just how you see things. This is just your truth. But it is not your truth. It is the addiction's truth. The lens is not who you are. It is what you are looking through. And as long as you cannot see the lens, you cannot see past it. This explains why two people can live in the same circumstances and have completely different experiences. One sees opportunity, the other sees threat. One sees support, the other sees judgment. One sees possibility, the other sees limitation. Same external reality, different lens. And the lens they are using was not chosen consciously. It was installed by the patterns they repeat, by the wounds they carry, by the addiction they feed. When you change the lens, reality changes. Not because the facts change, but because the meaning changes. The same event that once felt devastating now feels manageable. The same person who once seemed threatening now seems neutral. The same future that once seemed impossible now seems within reach. This is not positive thinking. This is what happens when perception is no longer distorted by the addiction's filter. You begin to see what was always there but could not be seen through the old lens. Jung worked to help people identify the lens they were using. He would ask what they expected to happen in certain situations, what they believed about themselves and others, what they assumed was true before any evidence appeared. These questions revealed the lens. And once revealed, it could be questioned. Is this actually true? Or is this what the pattern wants me to believe is true? That distinction is everything, because if it is the pattern speaking, you do not have to obey it. You can choose to see differently, but only if you first see that you are seeing through something. The lens creates what Jung called a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you expect rejection, you will behave in ways that invite it. If you expect failure, you will unconsciously sabotage success. If you expect betrayal, you will push away trustworthy people and cling to unreliable ones. The lens does not just filter what you see, it influences what you do. And what you do determines what happens. So the lens becomes the architect of the very reality it perceives. It creates the evidence that confirms its own existence. This is the most insidious aspect of the addiction lens. It makes itself invisible by proving itself true. You do not question it because everywhere you look, you see confirmation. But you are not seeing objective reality. You are seeing a reality that has been shaped by your filter. The rejection you perceive is partly created by the defensive walls you erected. The failure you experience is partly created by the self-sabotaging choices you made. The isolation you feel is partly created by the distance you maintain. The lens is not just observing these outcomes, it is producing them. Breaking free from the lens requires recognizing that what you think is reality is actually interpretation. The facts exist, but the meaning you assign to those facts comes from the lens. Someone cancels plans. That is a fact. What it means is interpretation. And the interpretation is determined by the lens you are using. If your lens says you are not important, the cancellation means rejection. If your lens says people have their own lives, the cancellation means nothing about you. Same fact, completely different reality. And the reality you experience will determine how you feel and what you do next. Most people defend their lens because it feels true. It has been true for so long that questioning it feels like denying reality itself. But the lens is not reality. It is a tool that was built in response to old wounds, a tool that served a purpose once but now distorts more than it clarifies. And tools can be set down, lenses can be removed, but only if you first become aware that you are using one. Only if you recognize that what feels like objective truth is actually filtered perception. Only if you are willing to see that the addiction is not just something you do. It is something that determines what you see, what you feel, and what becomes possible in your life. And once you see that, once you really see it, you cannot unsee it. The lens loses some of its power, not all of it, but enough to begin asking whether there might be another way to look at the world, another way to interpret what happens, another way to be. And that question, that single question, is where change begins. The addiction was never the problem. It was the alarm you kept hitting snooze on, and the thing you were avoiding waking up to. That was always you.